piece it together. They ask why. Every hidden corner, every alibi. They risk it all, they take the fall. For the truth that will stand tall.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this live. So today's video, I'll be playing a interview that Shane and I did with a MK Ultra whistleblower. He's from Project Monarch. And it's going to be a two-part series because the interview was so long. So this will be part one. And then I know Shane is working on part two, and that will we'll put that out maybe the weekend or maybe Monday, depending on when it's finished. But I do want to get part two out fairly quickly. So just a couple things I wanted to say before I play the interview. And this is pre-recorded, so yeah, it's not going to be live. Towards the end, I'm going to discuss a show, or I'm going to discuss someone named Sean Ryan, and I didn't give a lot of context, but he has, I would say, the biggest, if not the, or one of the biggest platforms right now on Spotify. And I think he's like number 2 or 3 on the big platforms as well as on YouTube. So in case, I know some of my viewers don't know the Sean Ryan show, but that's who we're talking about. And we'll show pictures when we're discussing him and the situation that went on there. And there is some sensitive information in this interview. Nothing too graphic or anything, but it is I would say a topic that is being suppressed. We tried twice to conduct this interview, and both times there was a disruption on his end, but we managed to get the interview done. But he's also had that happen since then a number of times. So that's why I didn't want to upload this, just in case there was some kind of interference. But here is the interview we did with Gray. And I'm going to just screen share. And then if you want to put questions and comments as this plays, I'll address some of them after the interview. And it's not that long. It's about, I think it's about 35 to 38 minutes. Look good? Oh, and there's going to be a little cut, and that is because the connection got disrupted, and then we had to try another connection to complete the interview. So if you see that cut, that's what that's about. Oh, and please subscribe, comment, and like and share this video. He has a very important message. And in the second part, he's going to explain a program, a very important program that he has recently gone public with that will help people who are victims of this program, or want to help with I guess the investigation, and he'll explain it in part 2, but he doesn't get to it in this one. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Tracy Derwin, and I'm here with Shane Buell, and we have a very special guest. His name is Gray, and we will be talking about a lot of things that I've been touching on a little over, the past 6 months or so, but he's an actual whistleblower that has inside information and a background on these clandestine programs that I've been, trying to figure out for a while. So Gray is a former or non-official cover operative whose double life violently collided in 2008 when he became self-aware as a Manchurian Candidate style asset, realizing his amnesiac childhood stem from torturous brainwashing under contemporary MK Ultra derived programs. Gray's disclosures triggered severe retaliation, including a narrowly survived Boston Breaks assassination attempt and nearly 2 years of false imprisonment, later attributed to a clerical error. Upon release, he founded OrganizedSafety.org, a revolutionary system inspired by the work of Valerie Wolf and others at the 1995 ACHRE hearings, where corroborating evidence on child mind control was presented. With Organized Safety, users can anonymously report information via end-to-end encrypted transmission and opt in for notifications using a new standalone email to preserve anonymity. Gray is now speaking out publicly again to rally support, drive public awareness, and leverage collective action towards this actionable solution for accountability and justice. So thank you and welcome to our channel, Gray, and thank you for your bravery and your willingness to come out and speak about this topic, because I know it's not easy, and most people will never get to the point where they're able to talk publicly about these things. So just for people that are less familiar with MK Ultra, mind control, give us a little background as to what those programs are and how you got involved in these programs.
Thank you for having me. So MK Ultra and related essentially is behavioral modification. So, mind control, MK Ultra, that was just a research umbrella on every single type of technique, substance, et cetera, that affects behavior. There was techniques and other things that they studied that was applied, more passively and generally to the populace. And then, there's a continuum, there's a spectrum. And then you have to the Manchurian Candidate level, to where essentially they were using largely trauma in combination with other techniques and substances to elicit people's mental defense, which is dissociation, essentially to make a split personality that they could then activate for covert operations largely. So that's what it really comes down to. And I think a large part of the focus that we will be talking about is essentially Manchurian Candidates. And even with that, there's a spectrum and there's different models, so on and so forth. All right. So I have a generational history of my people being involved with behavioral modification, kind of from different ends. Behavioral modification, which MK Ultra was a research umbrella of, is just simply things that affect people's behavior. There's a continuum, there's a spectrum. You have propaganda, you have misinformation, disinformation, information in general that's disseminated, that can affect one's behavior. But then you get to the more extreme spectrum, and there are techniques that take advantage and expound on mental defense, which is dissociation. When there's trauma that's extreme, especially if it's kind of like weird trauma, for example, from a caregiver, or a parent, to where there is some trauma, the person that's supposed to be in charge of protecting you, so on and so forth. When someone experiences trauma from that, it can really be hard for the brain to process, and that can elicit dissociation. So, there's techniques that expound on that, and at the far end of them, basically, they create a split personality in people. That goes into what is commonly referred to as a Manchurian Candidate. Sleepers. A lot of people hear about sleeper cells, things like this. Goes in hand with things like suicide bombers. People hear about it and it's horrible, but they might not understand. Like, think about what someone has to go through for them to be, so, into that ideology that they're willing to die for the cause, if that makes sense. So, there's all sorts of applications, but behavioral modification is simply, affecting one's behavior, and ideally in a predictable way.
Being kind of the beginning of this trauma, is it because they need that environment for this person, or is it bloodlines? Because we're hearing a lot, like if someone has that bloodline, that's why that family is doing this stuff, or is it both?
Yeah, so I guess let me break it down like this. In the whole sphere of things, you have, first and foremost, you have what's I call the family and the network. And you'll hear a lot of people refer to this, but the family would be, bloodlines, would be ancestors. And just to be clear, dissociation is a hereditary trait as well that is passed down. So, and then you have the network, which is, more government, and then non-governmental organizations that partner with them, and, psychiatrists, other people and specialists that will be involved with this, but might not necessarily buy into the ideology. Now, the reason I say ideology is because a lot of these techniques were actually taken from age-old occult methods, and you go into these old cults and you hear about this. And, when you get into Luciferians, when you get into Satanists, even some of this, these dark rituals and things like this, there's a method to the madness. It's really dark neuroscience. Supernatural aspect aside of this, you have, some children that are raised believing in Santa Claus, right? But then you have other children that are raised basically believing in, dark powers from spirits and so on and so forth, right? So, regardless if there is a supernatural element or not, if you raise a child up, in that occult upbringing, that occult path working, some people refer to it as, there's going to be a heavy effect. Obviously, yes, the bloodline aspect and things like this, it traces back, you have your ruling class and your priest class. Those same methods are still at play. That's kind of one of the big secrets that people don't really know about. But, if you think about it, how much does the average person know about different cultures? Even you take it, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists, Mormons, things like this. They have a wildly different upbringing than your common person. Same thing with Amish. And then, you get to, on the outskirts, you have some indigenous tribes, things like this, right? There are different ways to bring up young. And, obviously, if you interrupt the developmental process and then specifically do certain techniques, it makes a grave difference in how that person grows and develops and ultimately is.
So when they say they're looking for certain bloodlines, that kind of increases the chances of that person being a success or being a stronger candidate. But they could do this to someone that doesn't have this genetic disposition, or is it almost always some kind of genetic family line that they look for?
Well, there's at this point, a lot of people have dissociation hereditary, but, and you hear this, they're looking for, they're not looking for anything. They already have everything mapped out, going way back. But yes, the dissociation, which is key, is hereditary. And just, essentially, and you hear people hear about like royalty inbreeding and things like this, right? Well, to be clear, really what's going on is they're line breeding. Okay, just like dogs or racehorses, these people have long been, joining houses, have been selectively, partnering, and there's this ties in with eugenics and things like this too. But you say you have a government program that may be looking for certain bloodlines, maybe looking for certain hereditary traits, whatever semantics, whatever nomenclature you want to use here. But then you have these families that are operating at the same time, and they may have their people in these government programs too. It's intertwined. And, the agenda is different. There's a lot of places that are using these techniques. There's a lot of people and groups that are using these techniques, but not everybody is part of a singular group. You know, you have some aspects of the government who may be doing this because all the superpowers, you know, of the world are doing this, and they have to competitively do this, you know, for, you know, sleeper cells that they're, you know, sending to other countries to be prepared, and spies and couriers and so on and so forth. And, you know, they may truly believe they're doing this just because the end justifies the means. But then you may have your people like these families, these ruling bloodlines, which, you know, that might be a lot for someone to swallow. But I mean, if you look into these banking families, if you look into it's kind of a generational trade even. You know, these people are staying in and kind of ruling certain territories. And what's going on is these families are making sure that they essentially are having the back door, so to speak. They're grooming people even to go in these government programs because they know what the government programs are looking for. Because a lot of these government programs, again, these techniques, they go to age-old occult methods and the Luciferian, the Satanist occult path working. And, you know, yes, they might try to clean it up, and they're using more scientific nomenclature, scientific themes, and, you know, essentially putting people through a recipe that may be leaving some parts out, right? But it's so compartmentalized that the people in the government, you know, not everybody is on board with the ideology. Not everybody, you know, believes in the religious aspect or is even aware of the religious aspect. So you have, you know, different agendas at play. And it's, you know, it's kind of hard, I guess, hopping in the middle of it here. But, you know, you have what MK Ultra, the research stemmed into, you know, worldwide operational programs that are ongoing, which is essentially largely grooming Manchurian candidates and sleepers to go into all sorts of different fields, okay? Because essentially what they're doing is, you know, we'll use Monarch, for example. That's a large umbrella. And again, don't get too caught up in these terms because you'll hear a lot of different things. You know, these terms get commandeered and they try to water them down, muddy them up to confuse it. But just for all intents and purposes, Monarch is a breeding and placement program. Now, subjects in Monarch will have MK Ultra type conditioning applied to them in a range that goes from, you know, techniques that encourage silence and compliance, all the way to techniques that encourage complete control, even through a split personality that lays dormant subconsciously, but can be activated. Okay. Now, Monarch is named that for a few reasons. One is monarch butterflies have a migratory pattern, right? And they go from Mexico to the East Coast in the US, Mexico to the West Coast in the US, and they just gather just, you know, by the hordes. Now, that migration pattern actually takes about 5 generations. And the information for that migration pattern passes down genetically. So it goes into epigenetics. It goes into information that's passed down, right? It's a generational plan. Now, on the other end, monarchs are also known to rule territories and be assigned there. So just like you have a lot of other things where, you know, the world is split up in different categories. In the U.S., you have FEMA sections, FEMA regions, right? Things like this. So, you know, they will specifically be applying this conditioning to all their assets. And, you know, some go into ruling territories. It's not just sending people into politics, and not just politics, but the breadth of, you know, they'll have some people in legislative, some people in judicial, some people in executive, and then in their little club, they will have united the separation of powers, you know, for their doing. So you'll have, you know, ruling territories, just like senators, governors, and presidents, you know, so on and so forth. But then also you have virtual territories. You have media. You have journalists, right? You have, you know, large media personalities that have influence. You have sports. You know, you have you have just entertainers, you have musicians, you have actors. Okay.
Yeah.
Again, that's kind of ruling virtual categories. So essentially, you have people being brainwashed at an industrial scale and sent to all different places. Okay, so that's kind of where the codename Monarch comes from, because it's not only representing the epigenetic, the generational hereditary traits and the generational plan, but also the ruling aspect of it.
I thought the Monarch name came because of the brain scan. Looks like a monarch butterfly. I don't know where I heard that, but it's interesting. That has nothing to do with it, right? Like when you look at the brain scan, the two sides.
There's also some things about reproductive and the pelvis, and then there's also other things about the butterfly and the spirit and the soul. There's definitely a lot that can be looked at, and there may have been layered reasons, but definitely the hereditary, the epigenetic information that's passed down, as well as the ruling aspect, are the primary reasons that I was advised of, whenever into it.
Yeah. So can you touch a little, and I know there's a lot of different techniques, but just maybe one or two techniques on how they create this second, third personality, and how do they activate it? So you're saying people have multiple personalities and like one can't even access the other at some point? It's like,
yeah. So again, there's a spectrum, but going to the extreme end of this, this starts very early, very early. We're talking about pre-verbal, pre-lingual. Okay. So there will be certain types of trauma. Okay. Unfortunately, sexual abuse from a primary caretaker, that's one of the most notoriously, infamously effective ones, just because it's so confusing on a child. And unfortunately, it kind of like also creates its own self-replicating cycle to where hurt people, and you'll hear about people reoffending. But so essentially what will happen is trauma is paired with certain stimuli. Okay. While a certain trauma is taking place, they may have a room that's all a certain color, and there may be a certain shape that's present or shown. There may be a certain song sung, there may be something, but that's the initial steps is, specific abuses tied to certain stimuli. We're talking about, they like to align frequencies, okay? And, frequencies, not just a sound, your frequency can be a color, we're talking about, it stimulates all the senses. So really here, there's certain traumas paired with different stimuli and, affecting of the senses. You think of it like this. You have, all your senses. You have sight, sound, taste, touch, et cetera, et cetera. So really here, it's almost like a 5-pin key. You stimulate the senses a certain way, and then it all lines up and then can twist, right? And that may be one compartment. And again, paired with this trauma, what it does is it affects development, and people will disassociate and kind of go into a state of shock. And that's essentially repeated and expounded on, and the brain kind of walls off in there in certain neuron pathways, bypass the hippocampus, or, the brain uses the amygdala, hippocampus to, basically process and store memory. There's just short circuiting the brain where it can't process the memory and creating new neuron pathways basically to a compartmentalized element. Okay. So essentially, yes, there's trauma paired with different stimuli, and that stimuli turns into the way that this certain, since it's a mental defense that goes there for that trauma, that and it's used to getting that trauma with the shape, with the color, when that's repeated, the person will go back to that certain place. So I know I'm stretching this out here, but you hear about all these different wild traumas, and you hear about these very weird things. The reason being is the same sort of stimulation, the same traumas as a mental defense will bring that person back to the same area to deal with it. Again, it's a mental defense. So there has to be a different type of trauma. So, say you have this, weird, sexual trauma paired with a circle, paired with the color yellow, just completely thing. So that's repeated. That makes a compartment, and eventually this can get linked to, more specific post-hypnotic suggestions to call this up to activate it. But, just keep that to the side. So that's repeated. Then there's a different trauma that's done with spinning. And that might not sound that traumatic, but if they spin, and this goes way back, there's been a lot of science in this, and this is one of the techniques that is used commonly because it's much harder to accidentally hurt someone compared to physical torture. So say there's a bunch of spinning, now you have square, now you have the color blue. You see what I'm saying? So they'll use weird new traumas paired with different stimuli to make different compartments. And the goal is to make as many compartments as possible. Because just like a computer, how do you use a computer? How do you use the hard drive? You have all these different folders. You have the different files in the folders, and you have to have compartments. That's the basic programming for computers, for people. So that's a rough explanation of how that works.
Yeah, I mean, we could all kind of think of a smell that brings us back to a certain time or place in our memory, kind of like that, but in overdrive. You mean like a stimuli
absolutely
that brings you to a certain.
Absolutely. And smell is very nostalgic. It's known to trigger that. And, you have certain effects to where, you have Pavlov, right? To where, eventually the dog salivates when it hears the bell, when it's time to eat, right? And that conditioning, there's different sort of conditioning that's repetitive, and it makes what's known in some fields as a conditioned stimuli response sequence, right? Yeah. So then, another aspect of this would be if you've ever caught your finger in the car door or something like that, subconsciously, then maybe for the next week, for the next month, you go to slam the door, you say, "Ooh, be careful, I pinched my finger the other time." Some of that pain will make you remember, and you'll think about that. It's just taking this natural occurring phenomena, these natural occurring mental defenses, just neuroscience and just the way people function, and then it is expounding on that. It's taking advantage of natural mechanisms and then building on that. It's not about always going against the grain, because that's just, again, it's resistance. So even with hypnotism, yes, you can hypnotize someone to make them do something, but if you go against nature, natural instinct, it's less and less effective. So they try to get things that go with the psyche, that blend in with that person's personality, that blend in with natural occurring behavior, and expound and build on that.
Okay, so I know I heard you say colors and shapes. Reminds me of the interaction you had with the Sean Ryan show, and that insight that you gave on Josh's show Polarity really clicked for me, because I used to be a very regular Sean Ryan show viewer until that Cybertruck incident happened. And then it was after that he changed. He even says, "I'm not in control of my channel anymore." He even looks different. The way he questions and the type of guest, it kind of changed after that Cybertruck event, and I could never figure it out. But can you tell us a little? And while you're telling us, maybe Shane, can you put some of these screenshots of how you figured out? I know you had some communication with a producer that live kind of came to the realization because of a little something reminded him of something, and then he was realizing that he was under one of these programs. So how did that come about?
Yeah, well, previously I was living in the same area as Sean Ryan, and also essentially the same group that's running him as an asset. I also have ties and, form a relationship with those same people. So I already knew that Sean was an asset. Now, just for a second, aside from, what I had known, it's important for people to realize when you have the #1 show for the military-aged male demographic, that is prime material. when you get to the people running these programs, the people calling the shots, it's very important. People go way back. You hear of Mockingbird, things like this. Like, you have to know the media is owned. Yes, there's going to be some people that put out, whatever they want. Even the assets that they're running, it's largely organic. They look for certain things they can control and then build it up, or they look for people playing ball and then build it up. Like, this is just the way life is. Unfortunately, there'll always be, people that call the shots pushing their own interests. It's just that there are certain people calling the shots that are playing really dirty and applying these really messed up techniques. Okay. So it's not that, like, no matter what, these people can do no good. It's not like Sean Ryan can do no good at all, or that he's a horrible person, something like this. That man is essentially a Manchurian candidate that originally was conditioned, for, military, a military role, right? But then obviously once you kind of play that role out, whether you age out, whether, you're injured, whether you become disillusioned, whatever, they put a lot of resources, a lot of time and money into building up an asset. They want to still use them, right? So, what happens is they switch the role to media. So aside from me getting steered there and me already knowing what the deal was, I had contacted them trying to get through to Sean because I knew people that he had worked with. I knew people that were running him as an asset. And I also knew some guests that were on his show. So essentially I reached out to them and was just like, hey, I'm not sure if y'all want to get into this, but basically I was raised in this clandestine program, blah, 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 right? And then, his person that was, in charge of the research and so on and so forth, essentially we're like, oh my God, how do you know? Because I think I might have been in that program. Now, I knew Sean was, and I'll be honest, like, I'm doing a lot. I should have thought about it deeper, but I wasn't even prepared for that. But of course, they're going to have a team and they're going to be running the assets. So, that person had been through a lot. And when they essentially did a ceremony to deal with like some PTSD, right? Essentially that got them to a place where the trauma had come up. Sometimes, if people go to a certain place, certain things will take them there and these memories come up. The thing is, they had no context for the memories and didn't quite understand what it meant. Yeah, they knew they had been messed with. They knew some things had happened. But like when you're having flashbacks, a lot of this, a lot of these techniques are applied when someone's really young. It interrupts their development process. So it's a lot. If you don't know what, this essentially whole dark neuroscience is like, and if you don't have context for it, it might be too much to decipher or understand when memories do come up, right? And that's on top of it just being such a traumatic thing that naturally your body's trying to bury it down. You have a flashback, just like you have combat veterans that have a flashback. And then, you'll see them kind of space out, their eyes at a 1,000-yard stare, and they're back there. They're going through it again, even though they're present here right in front of you or wherever they may be, they're back experiencing that same event, right? That again was too traumatic to where it short-circuited their brain and they didn't process it. So essentially, when I shared the bit that I did, they had more context and then looked into it and then started to realize, oh, that's actually what I was, dealing with. That's what my memories are, and, had some context to understand what they had been through. So,
yeah. And I think he said that he was afraid he was going to shoot himself in his sleep. So that was some sort of, there's a word where you're programmed to end your life, right? I forgot what the
yeah. Unfortunately, it's it's in trigger warning for people that may have been through this, because I'm going to speak freely, and some of this stuff may trigger, but typically there's a very layered sequence, otherwise people would accidentally be getting triggered left and right. But if you're already kind of dealing with some of these memories, some of that veil may be thin. So just fair warning to anybody, please be careful listening to this interview. But yeah, so omega programming is known as, and that's often associated with the color green and things like this. But the people that are executing these programs, that are executing these protocols, this is serious business. They don't play around. You say, okay, well, so, why don't people know about this? Oh, surely people would be whistleblowing about this. Well, a lot of people do. The information flow is controlled. But also, there is serious techniques. There's a sterile protocol. They don't use someone as an asset unless if base programming is a success. So that's what people have to understand, because they're like, oh, it can't be everybody. Well, the thing is, it's not everybody. It's just the people in front of your face, because the people that are forward facing the public, a lot of, not all of them, of course, but a lot of the top journalists, a lot of the top politicians, especially the ones that are very public, so on and so forth, they have went through the process and then went through the pipeline. They wouldn't be there if they didn't. So one of the first things that they do is establish base programming. Two parts of the base programming are what's known as gamma and omega. And essentially, these come into play to prevent unauthorized disclosure. Okay? Mm-hmm. So gamma is misinformation, disinformation, and then omega is self-termination. If an asset, if a subject is too important for whatever reason, to the powers that be, sometimes omega is switched out to where instead of self-termination, they go, there's other elements that may play that I don't need to get into publicly. But yeah, omega is self-termination. If people are disclosing unauthorized, if people are remembering too much, if they are whistleblowing and speaking out, first flashbacks will, just like a post-hypnotic suggestion. When this training's done, it's drilled in that, hey, if you never talk about this, if you do, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. It's put in very deep, it's a very scientific process and all this, but essentially it's very specific instructions given, while the person is in a very vulnerable state, whether it be hypnotic somnambulism, whether it be, in deep delta, in a tortured, catatonic state, so on and so forth. But that's how this is controlled. So, like with the Cybertruck guy, you'll see at first he had a certain story, and then he's planning to meet people who's going around. All of a sudden things start getting a little bit more confusing, things don't make sense and all that. That's gamma kicks in. Gamma is the disinformation. It starts confusing the disclosure, muddying the waters. If that isn't enough, it's a fail-safe. If that's not enough to keep a lid on this, well then, unfortunately, the next phase is implemented, which is omega, self-termination, which it seems, unfortunately, like did take place for that.
You think the Cybertruck, I forgot the man's name, the
Matthew Leibensberg, I think.
Leibensberg. So you think that wasn't what he was programmed to do, the Cybertruck thing. He was supposed to be doing something else, and something kicked in, and that's why he went through the process of getting the Cybertruck and explosives? Or was that his mission? Was that, you think, what he was supposed to do?
I don't know 100%. But from what I've collected at a glance and through limited information, some of it inside, yes, I do believe that he genuinely was whistleblowing on information. And then as soon as that process started to take place, then the programming kicked in, which first confused his disclosure. Because if you look at the history of what his initial emails and his initial story was, and then, subsequent communications, it started kind of veering off. And then eventually what happened, I do believe that it went from gamma to omega. But, moving from the Cybertruck, I'm not dying on that hill. I'm just saying how these things play out, and that, from everything I've collected, I am confident that that's what took place with him. But going to Sean's staff, they were saying, I couldn't, get the thought out of my head, green. I was afraid I was going to off myself in the middle of the night because that programming was going off. Once they started remembering, it was too much. It was too much of a risk, and their omega got activated.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So the initial emails that Leibensberger was probably true. He was probably trying to disclose some, I think, war crimes and the anti-COVID stuff. So that was things that he had insight on, but that doing that disclosure kicked in the other programming,
The
and that's why
gamma.
the
Yeah.
Cybertruck incident happened.
Exactly. And you'll see a pattern of people in different places, to where, once you understand the base programming and the protocols, which is gamma, omega, you'll see that pattern come up again and again and again. And then, furthermore, you can match up pipelines, whether they're going through the military pipeline and ending there, or whether they're going through a certain educational pipeline. Some people go through the educational and the military pipeline. But then you have like a lot of these shooters, things like this, and you'll see a lot of them end up self-terminating at the end. Sometimes also Omega is done in a sequence, and that's more likely where the whole thing was a plan for the shooters. Again, not 100%, but very likely.
Crooks.
And you'll even see some of them were complaining about voices, complaining about this, complaining about that. Sure, I'm sure some things are random out there, but I mean, this is a known program, and they have been, running this for quite a while. I mean, it's sinister, disgusting, horrible stuff.
Yeah. Well, I never thought in my lifetime this would become so public, because I think a lot of people are, knowing, and they believe it, whereas before it was just considered crazy. Anyone like you would be just considered crazy. But I'm so glad people are, realizing that this is really happening, and as disgusting and demented that it is, and I think it's been happening since the beginning of, even the ancient Egyptians. I'm hearing that they were probably programming the pharaohs through smell to, do whatever the priests wanted the pharaoh to do, because they needed to control him.
The advisors, the priest class, even going to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's techniques described in there. This is an absolute fact. I mean, you go way back to the ancient dynasties. You have your seers, you have this or that. Yeah, I mean, that's long been a thing. I mean, people think that the real power is the president. They think the real power is the forward facing. No, real power doesn't like the limelight. They hide in the shadows and they pull the strings. They orchestrate. They're the architects. And yes, this goes way back. This is age-old occult techniques. They're dressed up. They have different themes that may or may not fit exactly with the time period. There's different nomenclature, different theme nomenclature, but don't get caught up with semantics. Just like Babel, right? Don't get confused because people are speaking different languages, right? I mean, this is the same protocol, the same recipe, just with different terminology, just, with slightly varying themes.
You're muted right now for some reason. I have no idea why we can't hear you. Still not working. Oh, wait. Try now.
Now.
There it goes. There it goes.
Okay. All right. So that was very helpful. I'm kind of starting to learn about this topic. And the thing that Gray cleared up for me is this all a spiritual, religious, network, or is that more what this is, or is this more psychological, scientific, technological? And basically it's both. It's like a different way of looking at things. And I think throughout history, it's changed. The more technological aspects. When I showed the screenshots where they were talking about the Monroe Institute, that is a facility where the CIA set up one of their mind control operations. And so that's more of the scientific aspect, whereas a lot of this SRA events that we're hearing about are more of the spiritual aspect. Okay, so I'm gonna get to some. Were there any questions that Shane you want me to get
Oh,
to? I'll put some of
um,
these up. Oh, it says, I've been looking forward to this interview because I have been following both Gray and Tracy separately for some time now. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I first heard about Gray on Polarity. I'll, if I remember, I'll put a link to that channel. It's really awesome. It's run by a guy named Josh. But what I really like about what I do is I get something new every time for example, I learned more things when I spoke to Gray personally this time. But yeah, I think he's really good at explaining things that are more balanced because some of the whistleblowers I feel they're more esoteric, they're more spiritual, and I don't know, and they're totally, I believe them. I sometimes wonder if that is to maybe discredit or maybe kind of compartmentalize that message to a certain population that might not be so on board with that. But I think if we can look at it from different perspectives and different explanations, that kind of brings more credibility to this topic, at least for me. Okay, subliminal messaging at various levels through places of obedience, fear, control, and even unity. Yeah, a lot of entertainment. I think at this point, most entertainment uh, puts this type of these messages, especially in front of children. Okay, great. Thanks for doing the interview and the courage to keep sharing what has to be heard. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, Gray is here. Thank you so much. Let me put some of his comments here. One thing to consider about bloodlines is a lot harder to leave deep family ties than it is to quit a job. Blood in, blood out. Yeah, and I was having a conversation with Shane about the genetic aspect of this. And I've been trying to think like, where did that originate from? I've heard stories that the descendants of King Solomon are very, I guess, sought after. But these people that we're speaking about, the people that were mentioned in the Bible, they lived or they existed so long ago. I don't know how they would trace someone's lineage back to someone from 3,500 years ago. And it also is, it also kind of implies that there are so many people, if that's really something that is being used as a tool to, I guess, decide on which families or try to look at which families are more susceptible. It's a lot of people. It's not just like a small population. Okay, thank you for conducting this interview and thank you for everyone for watching. I'm on the move, but I will pop in as I can. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Gray, for taking the time to be here. Okay, some people know that their actions are required in the timing that the handler needs them. They're fully on board and look down on others for being sheep. It is quite sad. Once you get out of a cult, you realize that almost everything around you is a cult. Yeah, it's if you're part of, I guess, popular culture, it's almost impossible to not be part of some sort of I guess a cult. I mean, that's not really a good way of looking at it, but we all have the tendency to belong to a tribe and to find your people. When then there is more flooding going on Hawaii, and I hear Oahu's getting hit really hard. Okay, were there any questions, Shane, that
We actually
You
didn't
wanted me
have
to?
any questions about the topic.
Okay. So I'll put some of these up while I talk about the next. So part two will be a little longer. There's going to be more information in that one. And Shane is still working on that. So we're not sure when that will be launched, but we'll try to get it up as soon as it's ready. And we'll do this kind of setup. We'll do a live, and then that way I don't have to upload it like beforehand. I'm trying to be very careful because I do think there are a lot of eyes on this topic now, and I'm trying to highlight those that I think are very genuine, that don't have like an ulterior motive to what they're saying. And in part two, Gray will explain the network that he has been working on. Yes, organized safety, and then I'm probably not the best person to explain it, but he'll go into exactly how this works, how it was set up, and if you're someone that has information, there's a way that you can safely report that information. Okay. Live.
And that is organizedsafety.org. I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, Sean Ryan. Yeah, I was a little concerned that a lot of my audience didn't know Sean Ryan, because I know his audience, I think, is more male, and I think younger, like the 20 to 30 year age, I think. But he is one of the most influential platforms right now, and I do watch his content. He does have really good information, and not all of it is controlled. He does feature people that have good information that is credible. And I think when Gray explained how it works, it's not these personalities, these characters, they don't follow like a complete script, but they are just, I guess, highly influenced in a way to present information in a certain way. And then Gray will go more into this topic of controlled opposition, because it's not a easy thing to understand. And there's many different levels and many different mechanisms. And a lot of it does come down to the financial aspect of being a creator, especially when you are a bigger platform and you depend on the income. You have a team, you have a lot of big contracts with advertisers. You're kind of held to a certain standard, and as you build that, if you have more financial backing, like a lot of things, you have more responsibility to those people. And it's like that with really anything. If you have an employer and that's how you make your living, you're held to a certain standard. And if you go too off script, you will eventually no longer have that job. Best disinformation, misinformation is mostly true. They build them up and only give bad information when it's most important. And I think especially right now with what's going on in the world, the geopolitical environment, the climate that we are in, I do think it's at a point where this is being, messaging is very controlled, very locked down. And I won't go too much longer. How much we're at? Almost an hour. Okay, I'll just leave with there's a channel called Man in America. I know a lot of you know Seth Holhouse. We've been on his show before, and He's one of those. He's not a huge channel, much bigger than mine, but he is very much stays true to himself. He doesn't have a lot of like advertisers. He has like some, but he's very picky with who he works with. And he was just talking. He gives really good insight in a way that I kind of have a hard time verbalizing, but he gives insight to this topic. And it's so good for someone like me to hear him say, how he started out. He was just making videos and something went viral and he ended up building a platform. But he's like, there's this club, even amongst the truthers, people like us that are trying to get really trying to get the important information out. He said that there is a club, and if you're not in it, just like a lot of things, if you're not in that club, things are very, very hard. It's very hard to get by. It's very hard to grow your platform. And I know exactly how that feels because you really need to walk a fine line without compromising yourself, but at the same time, just being able to, not get kicked off of, major platforms. So it is a good thing to hear that this is a known thing, that the club is very obvious and very difficult to get in without compromising yourself. Okay, and yeah, here, thank you, Shane, for saying this. Gray was a joy to work with, and I hope more creators will have him on their show. And then I think actually Seth is doing a series on this topic, so we should probably send him an email. But was there anything else you wanted me to put up, Shane?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so we'll put part 2 up maybe in the next few days once it's finished editing. Shane is doing a really good job editing that part. And yeah, Gray was really great on polarity. So polarity, Polarity. So check out polarity. I really like his content, all of his content. Okay, so yeah, that's going to do it. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Like, comment, and share this video. And yeah, we will see you all soon. Bye.
They piece it together. They ask why every hidden